Hello, and welcome to the Rhetorics Podcast, the show that takes rap music and connects it to rhetorical theory.
Have you ever heard the song, I Put a Spell on You?
Characters in the book Lord of the Flies. Two groups split up and became enemies of each other. This is the same situation we have between Biggie and Tupac.
Similarly comparing his huge success, or blowing up, in the music industry to the literal New York City World Trade Center bombing in 1993. That line alone was censored whenever the song came on the radio after 9/11. Which, yeah, touchy subject, to say the least.
Clearwater Revival version. Or perhaps you're the Annie Lennox version in a certain racy film.
The second verse of the song starts with the point of view of a black man with lyrics like screaming, "All lives matter is a protest to my protest," explaining how that's not actually a progressive movement at all, but instead a movement against Black Lives Matter.
Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the, first official Rhetorics Podcast. What? Media empire building over here. It's Dr. B here, and this is our official recap and debrief of Project 2, which is where I asked my students to write a podcast script. And as you know, it's important for me to give students real genres of writing for them to practice, but ultimately what this assignment was all about is allowing students to explore this concept of intertextuality.
First, what exactly is intertextuality anyway? Well, as described by James Porter, it is the principle that all writing and speech arise from a single network. To break this down further, I take the term intertextuality as meaning any connections that can be made between two or more texts.
For intertextuality, I'm going to borrow a definition from James Porter in which he states, all texts are interdependent. We understand a text only insofar as we understand precursors. This is intertextuality.
This is what makes it so significant to hip-hop. So many songs share relationships and allude to similar topics like systemic racism, police brutality, and gang violence, just to name a few.
In this course, not only do we see this topic highlighted in hip-hop, but other various texts. In his song Mortal Man, Kendrick Lamar highlights the themes of government, trust, strength, and revenge.
The way Kendrick Lamar uses all these techniques connects the entire album together and brings forth a deeper message to its audience.
So I had my students read an academic article entitled Intertextuality and the Discourse Community by James Porter to sort of explain to them how texts are built on older relationships with older texts from older writers. And from there, I challenged them to look at hip-hop texts, various songs that may reference, cite, or iterate on older artists and older texts for particular rhetorical effects. And so this project was all about asking students to study a writer and a text, and then ask why that writer and text might cite or reference or iterate on an older text and what rhetorical effect that might produce. What you're about to see is actually a collection of extra credit assignments where, since I asked my students to write a script that they might be willing to read as a guest on a podcast, I asked them to record small snippets or soundbites from their own scripts to allow me to then create this collage that you're about to listen to as a way to sort of facilitate a discussion with not only my face-to-face students at Virginia Tech, but my online asynchronous students at JMU as well. So without further ado, I will let the students...
According to James Porter, there's really two big ways that intertextuality is used. First is presupposition, which involves the making of assumptions about the context that the reader is interpreting the text within, and second is iterability, which is the explicit reiteration or citation of previous material.
Intertextuality is an amazing tool for artists to utilize, especially in the genre of hip-hop. It can give their text credibility, it can help them draw on established ideas, or it can be used to add creative effects that enhance their work. There are so many different ways artists utilize this concept, and that is why it is so fascinating to analyze.
One of the first ways I introduced the concept of intertextuality as it applies to hip-hop is actually by taking students back in time, giving them a little history lesson about two turntables and a microphone, simply understanding that the basis of hip-hop relies on taking one record, and even if it's an identical copy of that same record, to then extend the break beat. And of course, if you're mixing together one record and then sampling another or transitioning from one to another, that itself is intertextuality. So I taught my students a little bit about people like Grandmaster Flash.
The most monumental moment Theodore Livingston used intertextuality was when he decided to combine Kool Herc's merry-go-round technique and Grandmaster Flash's peekaboo system. He combined these two ideas and then added his own technique of what he called scratching to his songs. By doing this, he was able to take pieces of other people's ideas to create his own new concept. This was one of the biggest moments of intertextuality in hip-hop.
One early issue that I noticed at the draft stage of this project is I didn't do such a great job of explaining that I actually wanted my students to write about the moves that a writer is making and the ways that a writer connects their text to another text. And instead, what I got were some drafts that actually talked a lot more about shared themes or shared concepts between different writers. One of the biggest things I learned from this project is that partly the reason so many of my students were writing about themes and not connections between text is I may have given them a few too many options, a few too many inroads to this project. I also even gave them some opportunities to write about things that kind of violated my own desires for what I wanted this project to look like. For example, one of the topics I asked students to potentially write about for Project 2 was this discussion of the American dream as we studied it, connecting speakers and writers like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X to contemporary voices like Tupac Shakur, Kendrick Lamar, for example.
The American dream is, for the majority of people, this idea that if you put your mind and energy into something, you can be as successful as you want.
At the end of This Is America, he says lines like, "Get your money, black man. You just a black man in this world, and you just a big dog." Childish Gambino indirectly states that no matter the success African Americans reach, they will always face injustices due to their race. Jeezy, on the other hand, believes that once you reach success, you reach the American dream. These are two contradicting statements. With this knowledge, the listener is left with two sides of the story they could use to create their own logical argument.
Both American Dream and Juicy by the Notorious B.I.G. embody this idea of an American dream realized, the same American dream that King Jr. wished would come into fruition all those decades before these songs were even written. I think this point is very interesting as well, because this debate about the American dream has supposedly been raging on since at least the 60s. So why is this not a bigger issue? Or at least something portrayed accurately in the history books?
After the initial drafts came in, though, all I really had to do was create a feedback file to explain to my students pretty much a simple formula for this kind of a project. Write a simple profile of a writer or an artist or the designer that you're interested in studying. Find me that specific textual evidence from their own text that makes it significant. Explain to me how that text is connected to another writer. Does it cite, reference, iterate, presuppose? And then finally, explain a little bit about how or why this might be rhetorically effective or ineffective.
So looking at the song Strange Fruit from Billie Holiday has slightly different lyrics and tones than the way Nina Simone had sang it. They both are so meaningful, and the way they get related to the song from Kanye West seem far from each other. It seems interesting that the artist had wanted to use the song for years, and it seems downplayed in the way he ended up using it.
The idea of intertextuality is central to hip-hop since artists repeatedly get their flows from artists before them. A writer such as Tupac inspired others like Kendrick Lamar to talk about similar societal situations in their music. Kendrick thinks he is an offspring of Tupac's legacy. I know this since Kendrick claims Tupac came to him in a dream saying, "Don't let me die."
An example of intertextuality is in Kendrick Lamar's "Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst." Toward the middle of the song, the lyrics directly reference Tupac Shakur's "Brenda's Got a Baby." Both of these songs talk of tough situations, fear, and struggles, and yet they both include aspects of taking positive action. This, in addition to the direct reference between the two songs, is clear evidence of obvious intertextuality.
We'll be discussing the songs You and All Right and how they're interdependent of each other. You is a very silent song, and it was made this way for the listener to truly feel the sadness and anger that's going through Kendrick. Throughout the song, Kendrick screams and cries as he feels like he's made many mistakes on his way to becoming a global phenomenon. All Right is Kendrick's way of getting over this sadness and anger and depression by believing in God. It gives him the power to look past these failures.
After students offered examples of specific texts and how they were connected to other texts, I asked them to conclude their essay by describing the rhetorical effect of this kind of intertextuality. What does it mean for a writer to cite, reference, presuppose, or iterate on an older design? And how does that connect to new rhetorical situations?
The takeaway, in my opinion, is how the album turned from To Pimp a Caterpillar, its original name, to Pimp a Butterfly, as Tupac was finally able to deliver this message, his message, and break from the cocoon of his unfortunate and immature death set on him, finally being able to transform into a butterfly, completing his journey and passing down the torch toward the heir, Kendrick Lamar.
Ultimately, I was really happy with the way that this project played out, not necessarily because students did exactly what I thought they were going to do, but because I learned so much about how to teach students this idea of intertextuality, not just as it applies to hip hop, but for them to look out for new ways to think about different kinds of texts and the relationship that those texts have with ones that come before, as well as future new ideas, texts that have yet to be written.